Chapter 2. As a sort of aside, I wish to chronicle some elements of my personal evolution to manhood commencing at the time of my enlistment into the U.S. Regular Army, as it is known, as I later came to see myself more than ever identifying as the even literal son of the Uncle Sam character, which I assume was suggestive of the landed gentry who once formed the backbone of the country. In a major way, I unconsciously came to associate my beloved USA as a primarily Protestant construct. I say this because, although my formative years were decisively influenced by a decidedly Catholic orientation, I had come to internalize something of the Protestant work ethic in my person. Although I did not know at the time, my forebears on one side of my family were mainly Protestant, so perhaps it was in the blood. However, I was imbued with a specifically Irish Catholic orientation at bottom. Because I was effectively cut from a continuing Catholic education around the time of puberty and possessed an instinctive sense that something had registered as unnatural to me at this point, retrospecting bearing on the artificial transition that had occurred in the Church from the institution of Vatican II, and having been effectually transplanted into a very Protestantized milieu. I naturally strayed from this onerous and stultifying orientation, as I now felt it to be, despite efforts to keep me connected thereto. So upon entering the Army and arriving at my permanent duty, I began to encounter a variety of religious partisanism, all seeming intent on winning me to this or that denomination. This caused me to want to search out the meaning and basis for my beliefs as such, and basic religion's belief in general, most notably my own nominally Catholic faith. Forsooth, I had already started learning of something of a Confucianistic pursuit, inspired by a book on Chinese proverbs. When it so happened, I noticed the Gideon Bible I was given up on entry to the Army contained proverbs. It drew me to an investigation into the contents of the Bible, which I hadn't a clue what it contained apart from a few prior attempts to read the Gospel. It was about this time I encountered an amicable fellow who carried around a large Bible wherever we went. We began to converse, gratifying to my newfound academic interests, and the fact that he was intelligent enough to converse with in an astute manner. The net result of this encounter induced me to gravitate to and espouse a Protestant direction, away from the Catholic identification, which had failed to appeal to my intellectual appetite for learning at the time. A major point which influenced me in this direction is due to the fact that, on an unconscious, instinctive level, I came to associate Protestantism with patriotism as the basis on which this country I so ardently identified with already, and so naturally came to embrace a Protestant ethos as commensurate with the ethos I had appropriated as a youth. Being eventually, having been reared, as it turned out, in what I would describe as an upper middle class milieu, having in fact been impacted by a score of highly successful white-collar male influences, inspired me to become a high achiever and a real go-getter, a type A1 personality as such. Although I couldn't have realized it at the time, but nevertheless felt I was somehow singled out for special favor by my military superiors, I must have stood out as a unique and exemplary type of soldier. This was because, more than most, I followed the rules, took pride in my appearance and abilities, and conscientiously always gave 100% in whatever task at hand. Perhaps the high brass even took note and envisioned me putting me on a trek to join their ranks. However, no doubt they were probably puzzled by my uniqueness that they also couldn't quite grasp beyond their ken, but instinctively felt to be superior to anything they had seen or known before. That being said, I wouldn't doubt it that these, what I presume to have been Masonic orders by definition, hierarchical minions, wouldn't have seen fit to draw this cadet out of his Catholic associations into the ranks of Protestantism generally, as more amenable to their Masonic interests, and therefore more prone to adopting into their club. I fantasize that such elite combinations must have taken note of this strange bird, a veritable personification of not only all things Americana in a pristine sense, but a consummate byproduct of corporate America besides. Perhaps they dropped the ball in failing to discover taking the likes of me under their wings for tutelage, which I think they did. But like I said, this animal was something beyond their ken, being too exotic a species to categorize. I do resent this level of either ignorance or partisanship, that I was essentially left to drift along with no definitive directions, especially after being swayed, as I see it, from my Catholic roots. That I could have been a palpable member of their class goes without saying. As it was, I found myself shoehorned into an arena that I later concluded must have been a form of psyops run by intelligence operations within what I would now say was an indicator to the travesty of the U.S. government, already run far afield from our sacrosanct American roots, for who knows how many decades now from our inception. And so I was to embark upon quite a circuitous ride, tantamount to an odyssey in its own right, to a decisive discovery of the lay of the land, and the realization as to what heroic methods must be employed to combat a host of resultant ills and symptoms of a civilization in severe decline. If we are to salvage the most salutary gains of high Western culture in view of an irretrievably foundering ship of state which cannot be righted, and which experiment in governing has outlived its usefulness, having run its course at long last. And so, having embarked upon a studious inquiry into history on many fronts, and partly impelled there by a force of somewhat imperative necessity, I was to traverse many hills and dales, vales and crevices, lands and seas, until I was able to reach a safe harbor of belief and decision, to embrace a veritable sense of destiny in bringing a panacea to bear in fruition towards rectifying a host of ills. To this end I sensed I had been gifted to read between the lines regarding certain historical instances as such. I had, along the way, imbibed the knowledge contained throughout the King James Version of the Bible, thanks to Protestant impressions, but in order to acquire an understanding in a literary aspect of one of the major products of English history. Because of an innate fondness acquired for the English language, especially as that vernacular had evolved in the American vein, I thought to master it as best I could. During this stage, it should be said, I had developed a desire to pursue a ministry along Protestant lines whereby I might utilize my native talents or aptitudes I might possess to their fullest extent possible in conveying knowledge of any insights I fancied that could be useful to persons and masses, intrigued as I was at the arts of public speaking that I thought I might excel in as well. Although I amassed a fairly comprehensive overview of a religious essence germane to such theoretical dalliance, in the final analysis I was led to lay aside this venture as one would discard clothing that just never fit right. That left the value of learning intact, however, as a lesson applicable to further progress, at the time I knew not where. It was truly a form of trial and error which inculcated me to a great body of research I would never have otherwise gleaned. One thing was for sure, though. I did in fact feel desperate to ascertain a calling that really I never let go of, because largely this was a need in me for some sort of vindication of my existence. My raison d'etre, as it is termed, it was this orientation of my outlook that moved me to be always searching by diligent studies through an array of disciplines for a sign of sorts, or some hidden gem of esoteric knowledge which might impart to me a useful tidbit to my formation of an informed direction satisfactory to my inquisitive nature therein. For example, in wondering what could be the import of several founders of the Republic, presumably Masonic in ordination, in the choice of such symbology as, for instance, the pyramid with the all-seeing eye, as applied to the American experiment. I fancy that some such secret information was held and guarded by them, whereby it was expected by them that at some point in the growth of the edifice they were initiating, that eventually a veritable de jure and de facto monarch would arrive on the scene as a culmination of their venture, to effectively crown their efforts. I concluded this to be a plausible rationale and belief sustained by them through systematic inheritance from something akin to derivation from ancient texts, or prophetic utterance even. Inasmuch as life is essentially a tabula rasa on which to invent purpose and create means and ideals to pursue, I was taken with the idea of how best to foster a destiny for myself. The realm of artistic imagination appealed to me, and I pondered to what degree we are to entertain grandiose dreams and then work to actualize them. Many voices and writings encountered counseled the individual aspirant to dream big and go for it. I questioned what my part in the grand scheme might be, as well as the thought, what would I like to be? Was there to be limitations therein, or is the admonishment, all things are possible, a valid construct? Of course, a modicum of success and material enrichment were part of the American dream, which I could never seem to realize for myself, no matter how hard I tried. Is there something else I need to be doing? I mused. At the same time, I had seemingly borne an aversion to acquiescing into some manner of staid life format. It was an adventure that motivated me to seek a variegated lifestyle, tailored to my own impulses and instincts. But the rub was that I found myself enmeshed in a litany of arduous tasks, merely to make a buck in a seemingly endless cycle of never having enough to do the things I most relished doing. What a redundant, dead-end sphere to be locked into. I wanted out to pursue my visions of ascertaining one's true avocation, as decidedly my own special calling and purpose. Indeed, what is it I ought to be doing to find my ultimate fulfillment?